It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna time. How we doing? Hopefully everybody has had a great weekend, a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much for downloading, subscribing, viewing, listening. However you're consuming Rico Brogna, we thank you. We will focus on the rest of what David Stearns had to say at the general manager meetings. This is a multi-part episode, so if you missed the first part of what David Stearns had to say and our response to all of his answers, you can download the most recent Rico Brogna that was posted sometime Friday night or Saturday morning. We'll take a listen to the rest of what David Stearns had to say. But before we get to David Stearns, there has been news over the weekend in Major League Baseball, one of which is that Roki Sasaki has indeed been posted by the Chiba Latte Japanese squad. And I have not focused a lot on Sasaki. We haven't talked much about him. And maybe that's my own error, but the main reason why I haven't given him a lot of thought and we haven't talked that much about him on the Rico is I don't think he's going to be a Met. Now, I've realized that I'm just basing that on history. I'm just basing that on the fact that Sasaki, unlike Yamamoto, unlike other guys who become true free agents, he's not going to make a decision based on money. You know, we spent a lot of time last year talking about Yamamoto because the thought was maybe the Mets are just going to make the highest offer. Maybe the Mets are going to make the highest offer by a lot, and they'll just convince Yamamoto, despite the Mets not being the Yankees or the Mets not being the Dodgers or the Mets not having the right geography. They would just somehow convince him to come to the New York Mets. When you have a situation like this, it's very similar to when Ohtani got into free agency and he was posted years ago. The salary structure is very different. You could only use your international bonus pool money. And there are a lot of little factors that we're going to find out over the next few weeks, such as when is he officially posted? Is this going to be a part of the more recent international bonus pool signing? Or is it the brand new year, which could cause teams to kind of unethically, but they will do it anyway, walk away from agreements that they have from young international free agents they were signing so that they could take all of their money and give it to Roki Sasaki. But at the end of the day, the most amount of money you could have, if I'm not mistaken, with international bonus pool money is something around $7 million. And remember, if you get Sasaki to sign for your team, you have control over him contract-wise until 2030. So Roki Sasaki so badly wants to leave his Japanese team. And I've read a few stories that I guess they had some issues. He held out a couple of years ago. So he really wanted to get out, and they're basically doing him a favor by posting him. But he's not going to make big money. And so my thought has been, and obviously now I'm kind of changing gears because it's real. He's a free agent. So I've done a little bit more research on it. But my thought kind of remains the same, which is how are the Mets getting? How are the Mets going to convince Roki Sasaki, a 23-year-old fireballer, the next great pitcher to make that jump from Japan to the United States? How are they going to convince him when all the money is virtually the same, because it is, to eschew the geography of being on the West Coast, which you always hear is an advantage with Japanese-born players? How are you going to get him to ignore the Dodgers and not just their rich history, but what they've been doing recently in terms of acquiring Japanese players? How do you even overcome the Padres if West Coast baseball is a thing and he truly loves Yu Darvish? How do you overcome the Yankees despite the year we had? And as much as we think we've grown away from being little brother, Roki Sasaki's a 23-year-old kid growing up in Japan. I doubt he had a Met hat on. I doubt he had a Yoenis Cespedes jersey. So I still remain very skeptical that in a free agency that really doesn't involve big money, so Steve Cohen can't walk into a room, drop his checkbook and say, come on over. How do you get him? Now, Mark Feinsand wrote an article on MLB.com. I reposted this the other day in which he talks about who's involved. And Feinsand lists the usual suspects. The LA Dodgers are the favorites. The San Diego Padres are the favorites. But he also said the New York Mets, the New York Yankees, and the Chicago Cubs are among the teams that have done extensive scouting on Sasaki, who drew dozens of scouts to his starts throughout the season. One AL executive who believes the Dodgers and the Padres are the co-favorites to land Sasaki said the Mets may not be far behind. Quote, of the East Coast teams, I think the Mets have the best shot, the executive said. What I would have loved from Feinsand, or really from this executive, is why? I think we all appreciate that of the non-West Coast teams, the Mets have the best shot to get him. Okay, follow up. Why is that? Is it Kodai Senga? Is it Steve Cohen? Is it OMG? Is it Queens? Is it the Mound? Like, what is it? I mean, I hope it's the case. And for anybody that doesn't want Roki Sasaki, for anyone who says, nah, I'm good. And honestly, I think the reasons why anybody would say no to a young, flame-throwing, awesome pitcher from Japan would be twofold. Number one, they'd be preparing for the disappointment of not getting him. And number two, and I know that you've said this, Pete, you're kind of done with the Japanese pitcher who comes over and you can only pitch him on 6 days and you're not sure you're going to get that durability. Is that a part of your concern with Roki Sasaki?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like done with Kodai Senga. I know it's crazy to say because there's too many rules. Like we've gone through the rules before with Matt Harvey. We've gone through rules like in baseball with Strasburg and Chamberlain. Listen, I gotta be honest. You pitch 1 day every week. That's all it is. That's what you do. So let's make sure that you're available, and especially at 23 years old, get out there. So I don't want to deal with that. There's too many problems with the pitching staff that we have to sit there and baby guys.
So here's where I would agree with you, and here's where I would say you're wrong. When it comes to the big-time contracts, and we probably should have had this discussion more when we talked about Yamamoto a year ago, but I think we were all just so desperate, and we were all so wide-eyed that we're like, screw it, just bring them in. Like, we didn't think about those things, or maybe we did, but we didn't care about it necessarily as much. I think when you're giving out $350 million, or you're even giving out what they gave to Kodai, which is a much more reasonable $15 million a year, I understand the trepidation of, hey, that guy's only going to throw 140 innings. That guy can't pitch every 5 days. Do I really want to invest top dollar, $300+ million in a guy that's never going to be the 200-inning pitcher? And I would say to you, it's a very fair point, 100%. What makes things different with Sasaki is that he's not going to cost a lot. Like, you're talking about a guy who's going to be under team control, making a reasonable amount of money, well below market value for the first few years in 25, 26, 27, 28, and 29. Like, that guy is under team control for 5-6 years. So even if he's not going to be that innings eater you described, even if he's going to have a lot of rules like you talked about, it's not like we're paying him $30 million a year. So just be effective in the 25 starts you make, in the 130 innings that you throw. Even if it's not what we dream of from a typical ace, when you're paying a guy so much less than what you have to pay an ace, to me, I don't fret it as much.
No, I get that aspect of it. But again, I don't like going into a season where we already know that this guy's only going to pitch 140 innings. But which 140 innings is it going to be? Is it the first half of the season? Is it the second half of the season? Is it going to be playoff? Like, you're moving too many parts for something where, listen, we never knew that Sean and I was going to be as good as he was this year, but we did plug him in for a normal amount of starts this season. And that's what he did. I want that.
He ended up throwing 180 innings. And one thing to keep in mind about Sasaki, we're probably overshooting the amount of innings he'd throw, because last year, and I think it was an oblique, if I remember correctly, he threw 111 innings. The year before that, 91 innings. And the year before that, at age 20, was his career high, 129 innings. So he's not exactly thrown a lot of innings, though I do think there's a positive to that, which is that if you acquire this man at 23 years old, who's only thrown 414 professional innings in his Japanese career, you would assume you have a guy who's got a lot left. You know, he hasn't put a lot of mileage on his arm. So that's a positive way to look at it. I'm not going to lie. I have zero expectations that the Mets are going to get him, but I would want him. And I would be very, very, very excited if the Mets were able to somehow pull this off and acquire him, because I think, unlike a lot of other players that you acquire, not just from Japan, but in free agency in general, you're picking and you're buying for the future. He's 23 years old, and the best is yet to come. At least that's one would hope. And if it doesn't work out, it's not killing you that much financially. So I hope the Mets get him. I don't have a lot of faith for the reasons that are obvious. Why is he picking the Mets over the Dodgers and the Padres and even the Yankees when all the money is the same? But I will gladly, I guess, deal with those negatives that you talked about if they're able to bring him in and add him to this rotation.
He's basically Jacob deGrom at the end of his career.
What the hell's wrong with that? I mean, you say that in a negative way. If he's Jacob deGrom, jeez, I take that.
At the end of his career, though, where it's like, hey, we can maybe get like 90 innings out of him. That'd be cool.
That's all he's done so far. That doesn't mean that that's what he's going to do in the future. So keep that in mind. The other rumor going around is that the Mets, and they should be, they're attached to Garrett Crochet, who the White Sox have basically admitted, their general manager, Chris Getz, I think is his name, freely admitted the other day, yeah, we may trade him, and we're going to want a lot of position players back. So they've been pretty blunt, especially with where they are as a franchise, and it actually makes a lot of sense because Garrett Crochet already is arbitration eligible. He's going to be a free agent in just a couple of years. So you'd have him for 25 and 26, and then he'd be a free agent in 2027. And if you're the White Sox and you are so far away from winning, you're probably not winning or being competitive until Garrett Crochet is a free agent. And at that point, who knows if you even are. So wouldn't it behoove you and make more sense to deal him now? Here are the risks, here are the positives of Garrett Crochet, and we'll go a little bit more in depth as the days go on. He's only started one full year this past season. He made the 32 starts, but remember, they managed his innings in an incredible way over the last 2 months of the season. So even though he made 32 starts, and one could say he pitched a full season, he really didn't pitch a full season. He threw 146 innings, and in his last couple of months, we saw it because we faced him. If you guys remember this, they were really keeping him down to 2, 3, 4 innings, but he was very good last year. And again, he's another one of those guys that you're paying for the future on. He's a left-hander. He hasn't thrown a lot of major league innings. He missed an entire year a few years ago in 2022, and he looked so dominant, especially striking guys out. I mean, guys struck out 12.9 guys per 9 innings, and his control was actually really good, the best of his career this past year. So I'd be very interested in Crochet. Last year, I wouldn't have been. Last year, I've been a lot more hesitant to trade young players, but I think where the Mets are, I would be open to the package that it's probably going to cost. Now, what is it going to cost? You're looking at 3 or 4 position player prospects. I doubt Brett Baty has the value we all hope he has. Because sure, if Brett Baty's the centerpiece of the deal, sign me up. But they're going to ask for Jet Williams. They're going to ask for Drew Gilbert. I don't even know about Ronnie Mauricio's value considering the injuries. And we'll get to Ronnie Mauricio in a second because David Stearns was asked questions about him. But yes, as the White Sox look to ship off Garrett Crochet, it would be an amazing addition. He doesn't make a lot of money. So at least for the next couple of years, you're not even paying top dollar. Now, I think that when you acquire him, you're probably working out some kind of long-term extension. We heard that about him last year, that he wanted a long-term extension. And there's a good possibility that teams trading for him are going to go in there signing him long-term, which I'd be open to doing. If you're giving up 3 key position player prospects, you'd probably want to lock them up long-term. But yeah, of course it would be great. The question is, do we have the stomach to trade what it would take? We'll spend more time on that over the next few days. But David Stearns met the media while he was at those general manager meetings. We listened to about 20 questions the other day on a past Rico Brogna. We continue listening to the team president of the New York Mets, David Stearns. So David, take it away. I think the first question is actually going to be about Ronnie Mauricio, so it's perfect. Go ahead, David.
I think you touched a little bit on this a couple weeks ago, but you've got Baty, Acuna, Mauricio. Now, Mauricio still, I guess, hasn't resumed baseball.
No, I do think he actually has had a really good week, so we're moving in the right direction there, but he has not resumed baseball activities.
Think about that for a second. That is so freaking concerning. He tore his ACL almost a year ago. Not quite at a year, but we're getting very, very close. He had a good week recently, but he still hasn't resumed baseball activities. I hear that and I hope I'm wrong, but I'm going to tell you how I actually feel when I hear something like that. I hear that and I say to myself, I can't even think about him in terms of plans in 2025. And that sucks because we've mentioned his name a lot. Could he be the third baseman on opening day? Could he be the second baseman on opening day? Could he be part of a situation at DH? But if you're telling me he hasn't had a good week until November, which is a year after his injury, doesn't mean he can't recover. Doesn't mean it's not going to speed up now. But it's very concerning that this recovery has taken as long as it has for Ronnie Mauricio.
Those three, how do you see that fit?
I don't know. It's a great, if all of them are healthy and playing well, it's a great conundrum to have. I look, having multiple young players who have the type of talent that those guys have, who can all play multiple positions. If that's where we are come spring training, that's a very enviable position to be in.
Three guys he's talking about, if you missed it, are Jet Williams, Luis Angel Acuna, and Ronnie Mauricio, all of which came up as shortstops. They're all learning new positions. We saw Mauricio at the major league level playing second base. Jet Williams has played shortstop, second base, and the outfield. We saw Acuna up here. Look, it's a great spot to be in because those three guys have proven nothing. Their prospects, we're all excited about them, but they haven't done anything at the major league level. So I never would have an issue with having too many young players because let's see one of them hit at the major league level. As far as where they're going to end up positionally, I don't think Jet Williams is close to the major league level, at least certainly on opening day, considering he had kind of a setback 2024. I think Luis Angel Acuna can make this team as a super utility player, a guy who plays second, a guy who plays center, a guy who plays shortstop. You talk about position versatility. He certainly has that. And we just talked about Mauricio. It's tough to expect much, but let everything take care of itself because they usually do. If a guy hits, you'll find a way to play him. Mark Vientos proved that last year. And then other players may answer the question for you. If center field is a gaping hole for the Mets in the middle of June, and you've got one or two of these kids hitting at a high level, there's your center fielder. Obviously, the other thing, and we kind of touched on it with the Crochet trade, is that one of them may be used in a big trade. In fact, I almost expect it. I'm not saying it's Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert. Not saying it's somebody with Arizona. Not saying it's one of the pitchers with Seattle. I don't actually know who the hell it is, but I kind of get the feeling that David Stearns is going to make a big trade during this offseason, and all these young players that we're prospect hugging about, 1, 2, maybe more, are going to be gone. So we'll see.
The fact that Acuna came up at the end of the season and did it for you cast him in a little bit of a different light now going to spring training.
Well, I think anytime you're able to make an impression at the major league level, it's a good thing. And he obviously performed at a very important time of the season for us. We also understand it was a couple of weeks. And I think we have significant amount of performance history on all those guys to really fall back.
Yeah, Acuna impressed all of us, but we can't forget that overall his minor league numbers were unimpressive. And the brief time he was here was very brief. I don't think Luis Angel Acuna is a lock to make the major league roster on any level, but it was definitely a good experience for him. And it was a good experience for us because most of us liked watching him. And he did a really good job in a very tough spot with Francisco Lindor being hurt.
As far as Batty goes, were you pleased with his season at AAA? And could you see him playing any outfield at all or anything like that?
I don't think I'd close the door on anything. I think we learned a lot about Brett this year. When we learned that he's able to take a punch and go down and keep working. And I think we also learned that he's able to play multiple positions. And he picked up second base pretty quickly to the point where we were considering adding him to a postseason roster with the potential of playing some second base. That's pretty significant. And so his ability to do that leads me to believe that if we ask him to, he's going to be able to play additional positions.
Brett Batty needed that, man. I mean, if he wants to stick now, especially with the year Mark Vientos had, you got to give that versatility. We never saw him at second base. I felt like we talked a lot about Brett Beatty at second base on the Rico. I had a few people emailing me saying, shut up, Evan. He can't play second base. Why would you want him up here? You just heard it from David Stearns. Whatever they saw, they believed enough in him that they were actually considering adding him in the middle of the postseason. I don't know if he would have played. I doubt he would have. Obviously, they did not add him to the roster in the middle of the postseason, but left field, second base, third base, obviously potentially DHing. There can be a role for him on this team next year. Maybe not as an everyday player, but think DJ Stewart. Brett Beatty, DJ Stewart. I think all of us are willing to give Brett Beatty another crack at it. I also think that we're going to talk a lot about Beatty as a trade piece. I even did that when we talked about Crochet. I can't imagine his trade value is very high. And so the Mets may be better off with him coming to spring training, having that versatility, making the team in some kind of role in which he can play all these different positions, hopefully hit a little bit and rehab his value just a tad, because I can't see his trade value being that high right now.
Following up on Acuna, how does that small but exciting sample size in the majors change your view of him after, as you said, a large body of work in the minors?
Look, I think it's an additional data point, and I think we, the view of the player as a whole has always been one who has the ability to impact the game on both sides of the ball, and I think we saw that. He played exceptional defense in very pressurized situations for us down the stretch. If anything, that was the most encouraging thing for me, is that we put a guy who had never played in the big leagues at arguably the most important position on the field, and he made some big-time plays for us.
He did. No question about it. I think that Jeff McNeil's future, if he's not on this team, if the Mets trade McNeil for, let's say, a back-of-the-rotation arm or a bullpen arm, that could open up more opportunities for Acuna to play second base right away on the major league level when this season starts.
Yes, in the minors, purely hitting-wise, he didn't hit a lot in the season plus at the time that he was called up. How do you figure what kind of hitter he is right now or is going to be, given the large body of work that wasn't very good and the smaller body of work at the higher level that looked exciting?
Yeah, so I think there were elements throughout his time in the minor leagues and continue with his times with the Mets in the minor leagues, offensively that were good. This is someone who puts the ball in play. This is someone who in the minor league showed he could pull the ball and pull for power. And we saw those elements in the big leagues. I think he got comfortable at the big league level, and to his credit, he didn't chase as much at the big league level, and that was a nice step forward for him. And if we can continue that progression and continue making that work, he'll make himself a better hitter.
Remember, 14 games he played after he was called up, had 40 plate appearances. He did it 308. He hit 3 home runs. He had a 996 or 966 OPS. But his numbers at AAA were not great. 258, 299 on base, 654 OPS. He did steal 40 bases. Came up here, did not steal a base. Isn't that interesting? At 40 stolen bases at AAA, did not actually record a major league stolen base after he was called up. But, you've heard this before about minor leaguers where, for whatever reason, they struggle in the minors, then they get the call, and it all comes together. You've heard that, some guys are bored down there, and I don't think that's the case with Luis Angel Acuna, but you have seen that before with players where all of a sudden things get better when they're facing better competition at the major league level.
Dave, the way you're talking about those 3 players doesn't sound like they're going to impact your off-season planning and your pursuit of maybe other solutions for those positions, it sounds like, just because they seem a little further away as far as question marks.
I don't know. All 3 of those players have played at the big league level, and all 3 of those players at various points have succeeded at the big league level. So the one thing I'll say is regardless of what offseason we're going to have, regardless of where we are from an organizational perspective, we have to allow young players to play. This is going to be true every single year for us. And, we were able to see that this year with Mark coming up and really establishing himself. And if we allow ourselves to have those opportunities in future years as well, we're going to get rewarded for it.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with that. You want to have an avenue for a young player to show who they are. And I think the Mets are going to be able to do that this offseason. I do. I think second base is going to be kind of that sort of open slot for a young player, considering they have so many of these middle infielders that are learning second base. Second base and center field, I think, are going to be the two positions where there may be veterans to start, but if these young players bust through, they're going to have that opportunity to play.
What was Mauricio's good week? I saw you guys had him in New York, I think.
Yeah, so he's just the progression of his rehab. The knee is making progress. He's getting more aggressive with some of his non-baseball activities, and all those are positives.
Is he going to be healthy for spring training?
At this point, yes.
I mean, I hope this kid is healthy for spring training, but it has been so weird how long this rehab has taken. And nothing David Stearns said right there actually makes me feel confident that we should even use Ronnie Mauricio's name often when talking about plans early on in 2025.
When he says the knee is improving, what does that mean? I mean, we've had a year to improve, haven't we?
Obviously, it wasn't improving for the last year. We never asked about it. We never talked about it because there was a baseball season going on. You almost forgot about Ronnie Mauricio's existence during the course of the year, but clearly he must have had setbacks that no one really talked about because it was forgotten about.
I mean, we all see what happened with Alex Smith with the, in the NFL. I mean, something like that. Maybe. I mean, is it nothing that bad, right? Where it's like a setback of infection.
No, I mean, it was a torn ACL, and just maybe it's just a longer recovery for him. I don't think it means he can't be a good major leaguer. And I'm not even talking about him overall. I'm more talking about this upcoming season that he missed an entire year. He was also, remember when they called him up at the end of 2022, he gave us some good signs. Like I think, or 2023, I get my years confused now. The end of 2023, the bad year. He gave us some good signs, but he wasn't a lock necessarily to be on the major league roster. I think we wanted to see him, develop. So it's not just the rehab being slow and me being concerned about his health. I'm also starting to think that the Mets are going to send him to the minor leagues and say, let's just prove you're healthy, prove you're okay, and really take it slow with him. I'm starting to believe we will see more of Jet Williams in 2025, and he's got some work to do, than we will Ronnie Mauricio. That's why I think when we game plan this offseason and think about what this lineup may look like, I'm getting the impression we got to take it easy with Ronnie Mauricio and not expect much from him.
David, why was it slower than expected initially?
I don't have a great answer to that.
You have a bad answer?
You guys can let me know. It just has been. Sort of at every step of this rehab process has just gone a little bit slower, taken a little bit longer. We've had a little bit more inflammation in the knee than we would have liked at various points, which has caused us to back off, get the inflammation under control, and then restart the process. It's very difficult for me to say exactly why, other than some people's bodies just recover differently from significant surgeries.
It's a tough thing to answer because David Stearns isn't a doctor, but clearly he just, for whatever reason, maybe it is everybody's body is different. He had a very slow time recovering from this torn ACL. I remember when there were fantasies, Pete, about him coming back in September. When he first got hurt, I think you even said, maybe he comes back in September. I mean, meanwhile, we're sitting here in November and he still hasn't returned to baseball activities. It's crazy.
Well, I think there was original not big mentions, but I thought there was a note of it somewhere like, hey, there's a possibility if recovery goes the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
Like you said, and it just never happened.
No, very, very slow recovery for Ronnie, but hopefully it's going to take a turn for the good, and he'll be ready to go in spring training, and at least he can restart his development, even if he's not having an impact on 25.
David, what impact does Kodai Senga's season have on your pursuit of other pitchers? Like, do you have a firm understanding of what you have in him, given that he only made that one start plus his playoff performance?
We are confident that Senga's going to have a normal offseason, and we believe that a normal offseason will lead to a productive spring training and regular season. We don't think we saw clearly the real performance that we expect from him for when we saw him in the playoffs. And we saw a glimpse of that real performance in that start against the Braves earlier in the season. So we expect him to be back next year and to be himself. With that said, depth is a priority for us, and we are going to do what we can to have as much redundancy around our roster, including in the pitching staff.
I'm not ready to call Kodai Senga injury prone. We've had him for 2 years. I'm not going to judge him based on his career in Japan. I'm going to judge him based on what we've seen in the United States. He's been here for 2 years. His first year, he was healthy. Guy made every start, 29 starts. I know they babied him and they played the whole 6-day thing, but he went out there, had a really good season through 166 innings, and was fine, and he was healthy. This past year was a disaster. It was really 2 injuries. That's all it was. It was the injury in spring training that took forever, and then he comes back, and we all saw the fluke right before our eyes with the calf. So what do I expect from Kodai Senga? He's in the rotation, and I just hope he's the guy from 2 years ago. I'm also not expecting him to throw 1 inning. Like, I'm not expecting that he's going to go out there and make 1 start and throw 5 in a 3rd inning. So hopefully he's healthy. I think you almost have to look at him as every other starting pitcher where you're not sure what you're going to get. And that's starting pitching in 2025. Like, who the hell are you really confident is going to go out there and take the ball every 5 days? So we've had 2 years of Senga, 1 year in which he's barely pitched, but let's not forget his first year in which he was very, very good.
Where does McNeil fade into that infield conversation?
Well, the great thing about Jeff is he can play a bunch of different positions. And for the majority of this year, he was our regular second baseman. I'd be comfortable with him in that role again. If we need to flex him somewhere else, we'll cross that bridge as well.
They're going to trade Jeff McNeil. I really think they are. And I think they are for 2 reasons. I think that the second base free agent market is very weak. It doesn't feature a lot of great stuff. And even the third base market is not great. Once you get past the top guy, you get past Alex Bregman, you want to call Willie Adames a third baseman because he's willing to move to third base, fine. So I think that teams that need a bat are going to look at Jeff McNeil. They're going to see the contract as not great, but also not long-term. He's only got 2 years left on his deal. And I think the Mets, knowing the influx of youth that they have, I think they're going to trade him. And there's a lot of different ideas I have about Jeff McNeil trades. There's a lot of different ways you can go, none of which are sexy, by the way. I'm not going to give you something delusional. I thought of actually one the other day, a Met-Yankee one. Would you guys want to hear that? Want to hear a little Met-Yankee Jeff McNeil trade?
I mean, I would love to hear Met-Yankee trade. That's my favorite thing to do.
The Met-Yankee trades are easy because, like, I pay a lot of attention to the Yankees. It's part of my job on Sports Talk Radio. So sometimes knowing what they need and knowing the contracts and the pieces that they have just make it easy. So I call this a lazy trade idea because I'm just being lazy. We will have a trade podcast in which I will do a lot of research and it won't be lazy. But here's my lazy idea, and I have a feeling that 85% of the Ricoers are not going to like this trade. I wonder if Pete Hoffman will like this trade. You ready?
I think I'm going to love it, but go for it.
Jeff McNeil for Marcus Stroman.
Oh, no.
Why do you hate that so much? By the way, Stroman makes $18 million this year, and there's a vesting option for next year. So it's a few $1 million more than McNeil. He's a back of the rotation arm. I think I said earlier, I think Jeff McNeil will be traded for a back of the rotation arm. So it fits what I've described. What's the issue? Just because you don't like Marcus Stroman as what? A person?
No. I actually like how he pitches, personally speaking. I like the dog attitude that he has. He goes out there and fights. He just is like a 4-inning pitcher these days. And he's a chemistry guy. And I don't know if, sometimes I think last year there was a big issue between him and Gleyber Torres. Gleyber Torres wasn't, making his great plays. Stroman would call him out. Judge had to put him in his place. And plus, I think that you can get more back for McNeil. I really do.
That's what makes this so difficult. I don't know what you can get back, but I do think that teams would be interested. I think the Mariners would be interested. I think the Blue Jays would be interested. Is it a back of the rotation arm? Is it a bullpen arm? Maybe it's more intriguing to get a bullpen arm who's got 3 years of team control. But even that answer David Stearns gave, McNeil could play the outfield. McNeil could play second base. He's also had a couple of bad enough years to make you just worried that he's just never going to be the batting title guy he was back in 2022. But I took that answer as, maybe it's biased confirmation, but I took that answer as they're going to trade him. And I think David Stearns is going to be very active in the trade market. We saw a couple last year, nothing of huge magnitude, but I think not only are we going to see them trade a lot of some of their prospects for what I think is going to be a young, controllable pitcher, but I also think Jeff McNeil is going to be traded as well.
And I agree. I do feel that the trade scenario is going to start popping up like, hey, Devin Williams is going to be available soon because they're not going to re-sign him. Okay, that's a trade target. I think he likes his guys. But the one major trade I think we've said this before in the past, and this makes more sense now than anything, Jeff McNeil for Giancarlo Stanton. I think that makes so much sense.
It doesn't, but okay. I just don't think I know you guys were talking about trading Giancarlo Stanton the other day, but he's got a full no-trade clause that I don't think he's going to exercise. He's got a lot of money left on that deal. It's just, no, I don't think that's going to happen. But it was, may as well throw it out there.
If the Yankees want to get rid of him, the Mets should be looking. That's all I'm saying.
Well, the best part of acquiring Giancarlo Stanton would be that he can't torture us anymore. It was half why getting Jesse Winker was so great. It was, I think he can help us, but by God, I don't want to face him anymore. And Giancarlo Stanton has obviously put up some, murderous numbers against the Mets. Anyhow, let's get back. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Maybe that's a good strategy. Just get people that can't torture us anymore and build a team that helps.
Yeah, Tommy Edmonds next. Let's bring him in to join this middle infield. Let's hear more from David Stearns.
Does it concern you that he's had 2 straight years here where the first half he had trouble getting going offensively? Do you see any kind of reason for that?
I don't think I have a specific reason for it. I think Jeff made some changes over the course of the year that proved productive for him, and I believe he'll carry those changes forward.
It is fair to say that Jeff McNeil, before he got hurt, started to play like a different player. He started to produce a lot more. In the second half of the year, Jeff McNeil, I'll pull up the numbers just to give you the exact numbers. In the second half of the season, and these are really good numbers, this is over 41 games, so it's a quarter of the season. He hit 289, 376 on base, 923 OPS with 7 home runs and 20 RBIs. If you factor that out over a full season, that's 28 home runs and that's 80 RBIs. And we already gave you the average in OPS. So he did improve in the second half, but we've seen it 2 years in a row now where McNeil has this awful first half and then shows you signs in the second half. It's not even about that. I don't think he'll ever win a batting title again. Would it surprise me if he had a productive year next year? No, I still think he can be productive. I just think it's time. Sometimes it's just, all right, it's enough. It's enough. And I also think the Mets are positioned to replace him because they do have a lot of guys that can play second base, a lot of guys that can also play the outfield, a lot of young, cheaper players with high upside. So it's not about his personality, though I know a lot of Met fans feel that way. It's not about he can't be productive again, because I think he can. It's just time to move on. And if you can use him because he has value to get something that helps you in a different area, I'm very much open to it.
Where does Jet Williams fit into this outfield conversation?
Well, I think Jet still has some things to accomplish in the minor leagues, and so we'll let him continue on with his development, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, he's got to produce and he's got to stay healthy, but I'm very excited to see Jet Williams.
What is he doing at center?
I think he can play a quality center field. He's a great athlete, and I think whatever we ask of Jet, I think he's going to be able to accomplish.
Why don't you ask another question about Jet Williams?
Do you like him as a up the middle, 3 spots sort of player, or do you think he'll end up somewhere?
I think he has the ability to play all three up the middle at a high level, and where he ultimately plays is probably going to be dictated by roster need.
Amen. Get up here and hit, and then roster need will dictate that. That was the beauty of McNeil the last couple of years, and I think Jet Williams has that potential. But really what it comes down to with Jet is he needs to stay healthy and just hit. He didn't do that last year. One of the big disappointments of last year was that happened to both Jet Williams and Drew Gilbert. I thought they were going to have an impact on the 24 team. They so didn't have an impact on 24 that they're not going to start with the regular team in 25. They're going to have to prove themselves down in the minor leagues, and then based on how they produce and what's going on up here, that'll dictate where they end up position-wise. But also, they may be traded. That's also a possibility, though. I get a vibe Jet Williams will not be the guy traded. Hello, David. You have anything else to say, Mr. Stearns? Or are you done with us? I'm just kidding. We have another clip coming up, David Stearns. He will be asked about second base, which is a very interesting question because who is the starting second baseman for the New York Mets? David, take it away.
You have a lot of guys who could be the starting second baseman. Do you, in your mind right now, have a starting second baseman?
Like I said, I think Jeff was the regular there for the majority of the year. We've got 5 months before we have to make out a lineup. And I'm sure someone will be playing second base for us when we have to make out a lineup.
He's got no idea. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, you could argue there are like 6 different options on who the opening day second baseman could be. But I love how he says, well, Jeff did it for the majority of last year. Yeah, he did. Doesn't mean he's going to do it next year. Keep going, David.
Would you like to bring Iglesias back? He seemed like he did a good job.
Yeah, Iggy did a great job for us, both on and off the field. And all of our free agents, really, we're going to keep in touch and would love to have him back.
They should bring Iglesias back. I know that we've talked about them having a lot of guys who can play second base, a lot of young players who could eventually become the second baseman. But that's the key. Jet Williams won't be on the team right away. I told you I'm kind of not having a lot of faith in Ronnie Mauricio being on the team right away for a myriad of reasons we talked about on this pod already. I think they're going to trade Jeff McNeil. Could Brett Beatty be the opening day second baseman? I guess it's possible. So Jose Iglesias is a perfect stopgap guy. He had a great year last year. He was a big part of the locker room. I don't know if you know this. He's performing at Boomer and Geo Live. You can buy your tickets right now. But I think that bringing him back actually makes a lot of sense on all those levels. Plus, I think he's a good tutor. I think he'll help teach whoever, whether it's Acuna, whether it's Jet, whoever it is, kind of the art of playing second base, even though Iglesias is a shortstop too. But think about that. Think about all the different possibilities on the opening day second baseman. It could be Brett Beatty. It could be Jeff McNeil. It could be Jose Iglesias. It could be Luis Angel Acuna. Those are 4, I would say, fairly legitimate options. And then you've got Ronnie Mauricio to get to 5, and eventually Jet Williams at 6. Got 6 different guys. But I'm making this prediction. I believe the opening day second baseman for the New York Mets will be one of those guys I just mentioned. I don't think it's going to be Gleyber Torres. I don't think it's going to be Willie Adames. I don't think it's going to be Alex Bregman moving to second. I don't think it's going to be anybody like that because I do think second base, and I've described center field like this as well, are the positions where you're allowing that young player to eventually take one job. So I think the second baseman for the Mets, one of the names that I just previously mentioned.
And I just want to agree with you on the fact that Jose Iglesias should be on this team next year, unlike when you said DJ Stewart should be on the team last year. And the reason why I say that is because the versatility that Iglesias gives defensively, that's the type of guy that David Stearns wanted. When he brought in Joey Wendell, when he brought in Zach Short, Iglesias is exactly that guy. He could play second base, shortstop, third base. And his bat's not terrible. And I'm not talking about like power hitter, just talking a single hitter. That's enough.
When do we stop talking about DJ Stewart and me suggesting he be on the roster a year ago? Does that ever end, or do I have to live with that forever?
That's going to go down for another 10 years, man.
All right, fine. Let's hear more from David Stearns. He spoke to the media over the course of 3 days at the general manager meetings. These are some of the questions from his final day at the GM meetings.
How do you balance going down multiple paths in an offseason about, sequence and timing and things like that, knowing which direction you're going to go?
I think regardless of what the offseason looks like or what players are available, you always have to have parallel paths. You have to be talking to multiple players at once. You have to balance free agents and trades as well. So that's nothing new, and I don't think it is dependent on where in the off-season player pool you're necessarily looking. I think that's true in any off-season.
I don't know if that's really true. I think you always talk to free agents. That's why if there's a report they've reached out to Willy Adames, I'm sure they have. You should reach out to everybody. Reach out to Max Fried. Reach out to Blake. Reach out to everybody. But you're not necessarily going to sign a guy now. If you sign your top guy, that could change everything. So, yeah, I mean, maybe that is what he's saying in a way, because he doesn't talk about players directly. So it's kind of like you're trying to read through the hieroglyphics, basically. But you talk to everybody at this point in free agency. But depending on if you get this guy, that's going to impact if you're going to re-sign or sign that guy.
On the way when there's somebody like a Soto who's going to be a very top of the market guy for an exorbitant amount of money, as from a GM perspective, president, like how do you balance the benefit of 5 players for that one, especially when you have with a roster like you guys have with a lot of holes to fill?
Yeah, I think those are the types of decisions that we have to work through whenever we're talking about trade-offs of one player versus another player, multiple players versus one player. Again, on a lot of these decisions, and some of you have heard me say this before, there's no magic formula. There's a lot of debate and discussion, dialogue. How much resources do you want to concentrate into one position? What is the benefit of spreading those around? And the answers can be different depending on where you are in an off season. It can be depending on where you are in a competitive cycle. It can be different depending on where you are from a roster standpoint and a roster construction standpoint. So, again, I think those are the types of discussions that we will continue to have internally. And frankly, we're not going to have concrete answers to them until we make a decision to sign a particular player or not. And then
Yeah. So I want to read an email from Negative Dan, because I think Negative Dan, most of you are going to love Negative Dan. Most of you are going to say, you know what, that guy was annoying during the regular season, but boy, in the offseason, he's spot on. And the reason I want to read his email is because he is actually going to take something I said and probably describe it more eloquently than I did. And it was actually something not even here on the Rico, but on WFAN. I got into a fight with a Yankee fan about Juan Soto because their argument was, hey, if we could sign 3 guys for the cost of Juan Soto, doesn't that make us better? And I was pointing out, no, it doesn't make you better. It may sound better on paper, but no, get the great player, because you forget that if you spend $50 million on Juan Soto and you've decided to spread out the $25 million on, let's say, Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso, someone's going to play first base. May not be Pete Alonso, but someone's going to play first base who's probably going to be relatively productive, even if they're a lot cheaper. And also, those guys, they're with you for 3-4 years, maybe 5. This guy's with you for 15 years. Like, there are a lot of reasons why this whole spread it out for other players is a dumb argument. But anyhow, let's hear from Negative Dan. I think he eloquence it. Eloquence it? Yeah. No, that's not even a word, but you know what I mean? He lays it out in an eloquent way. Moneyball has destroyed everyone's baseball brains. Listening to people try to claim that multiple pieces can make up for missing out on Soto or even worse, saying that it's not worth signing him at all because you're a billionaire owner in a sport without a salary cap will have to give him too much money for too many years is absolutely insane. It's almost like we'd rather just moneyball a bunch of lesser guys together and accept losing out on one of the best players that has ever come available on the open market because, quote, he's not worth that type of contract. Sandy Alderson would be proud of everyone that is trying to replace Juan Soto in the aggregate. You guys can have fun with your 3J Bruces. I'll be over here giving the future first ballot Hall of Famer, world champion, whatever he wants for however long he wants it. I completely agree with Dan. It's weird to say, here's a blank check, but I think he's that good. I think he's that good. And look, where's the blank check going to go? It's not going to be $1 billion. It's not going to be $70 million a year, but it's going to be more than anyone else offers because he's that good and he's that young and you should want him on your team. Thinking, because it's not true, but thinking that 3 guys that add up to his yearly salary is going to make you better is completely wrong. And hopefully you can't tell because David Stearns is like a politician and he's not going to tell you anything as much as we try. Hopefully he's on our side and he realizes that no, in the case of Juan Soto, you're not better off giving the money to 3 lesser players. It's not even close. It's not true. And sometimes I think we just say it because we want to explain why we lost and how it's okay. It's not okay. If you're the Yankees, it's not okay. If you're the Mets, it's not okay. You're not better off without Juan Soto. It's okay to be mad about it. It's okay to say, man, I'm pissed at my owner. We should have offered more. That's the opinion to have. The opinion to have is not, we're better off without him because you're lying to yourself. Anyhow, sorry to go off on a tangent. Continue on, Mr. Stearns.
David, when it comes to Pete, you're not starting from scratch, right? You're just kind of picking up conversations that you've had, I don't know, throughout the year. Tell us about the process when it's your own player like that.
So just as a practice, I don't comment on any negotiations or any specific player. Pete's been a great Met. Would love to have him back, and I'll leave it there.
In general, when it is your own guy, which I guess you didn't do a whole lot of in Milwaukee, but how is that a different negotiation than when you're getting to know a guy? Maybe he wants to meet you and the manager and the owner, et cetera.
Yeah, there's a familiarity, and that should help. There's a familiarity. There's an understanding who the player is. There's an understanding what the organization is and how those two sides fit. So I think familiarity is a good thing.
I don't think it's a continuation of negotiations because of the season that happened. You know, think about it in Aaron Judge terms. You know, the Yankees made an offer to Aaron Judge. He said no. He had one of the greatest years of all time. Now they start negotiating again. I think it's a completely different negotiation. He's coming off a completely different year, and what the Yankees offered was now far outdated than what Aaron was going to ask for. The Mets made an offer, according to Joel Sherman, a year ago for Pete Alonso. He then had a year that was a little bit lesser than some of his other career years. So I almost think it's not a continuation and you're starting over. Look, when it comes down to with Pete Alonso, 2 things to me are going to determine if he's back. Number 1, if they get Juan Soto. And number 2, what's the market for him? If he has a robust market, he's probably gone. If his market remains reasonable and kind of in a normal territory, then there's a chance he's back. But obviously, David's not telling us.
Scott Boras earlier today talked about in dealing with the Juan stuff that he mentioned the owners were going to be an important part of that process, expressing their plans for the team, winning, you know, what money they were going to put back in. How much of an asset is Steve in that regard and being a guy who is out front with that type of stuff?
I think Steve's investment in our team is clear and his desire to win is clear. And he's been able to forge some really good relationships with players over the early part of his ownership tenure here. And I think that is a huge benefit for our club. He wants to do that. He wants to understand who our players are, what makes them tick, what is important to them, so that we can do everything we can to put them and their families in the best position to succeed. And so Steve has already demonstrated that throughout his ownership tenure here, and I think he'll continue to demonstrate that.
I played this clip on the air with Tiki. It's the only David Stearns clip I played because I was curious for him as a former athlete who had a very good relationship with Mr. Tisch and Mr. Mara back in the day. Like, does a relationship with an owner matter? And for Tiki, it did. And I think it does for, you see that Steve has that with a lot of individual Mets. You see that with Lindor. You know, you've heard about it. He's got players over for dinner. I don't know how quickly you can sell that to Juan Soto. I don't think it can. I think it's still just going to come down to money and chance to win. But you do see that from Steve Cohen, that he's a very hands-on owner, not in terms of making roster moves, but in terms of trying to have relationships with his players. And that can only be a good thing.
That's changed a lot, Dave, in recent years, how much, agents like Scott, and their clients want to hear directly from owners and not just presidents and GMs.
Yeah, I think players should want to hear from owners. I think players should want to understand what the commitment is to win in a particular organization. And certainly players of a certain stature who are making the type of long-term commitment to an organization should want to hear from all segments of the organization, including at the ownership level.
Yeah. And hopefully Steve provides that advantage over other owners. That, Hal Steinbrenner in a meeting with Juan Soto, even though Juan already knows him, or whoever the heck's representing the Guggenheimer family in LA, that Steve can kind of win that portion of the battle. The owner who the player meets and says, oh, okay, I believe in that vision. I like that guy.
You dabbled in the deep end of free agency last year in the case of Yamamoto. You don't have a ton of experience with that generally running a team. What is it like with Steve's resources and that paradigm shift for you personally going about your job in a different way?
Yeah, it's a great opportunity. I think whenever you have access to every tier of free agency and every tier available player, that's a tremendous opportunity. And it opens up doors, and we have to decide which door to walk through, or which doors to walk through at times. And that's really the fun part of this job. And to have more doors opening in front of you is a benefit.
Yeah. I mean, it's like your kid. You give them $5 allowance every week, and then all of a sudden you're like, here's $1,000. It's amazing. So David Stearns composed himself very well. But yeah, having Steve Cohen's money, pretty freaking cool.
Sort of a weird position for you in the sense that sometimes you make the playoffs a young team that's sort of built into something, but you got to just made it and have all these free agents. And so, you know what I mean? Like, where do you kind of view your team as you go into 25 in that respect? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we had a really nice year where a number of our core players performed at a high level. A number of those players are going to return next year. And yes, we have spots we're going to have to fill and do so intelligently, but that's an opportunity for us. And that's not too dissimilar from what good teams have to go through year over year. The formula is going to change. The mix is going to change every single year. I think that's healthy for an organization. I think that allows us to continuously evaluate where we are, what our strengths are, what our deficiencies are, and then hopefully go out and target the players that help make us better.
I think the only thing that's a little bit more unique is, there's always free agents. It's the amount of innings that are free agents that are pretty unique. Offensively, it should be a similar team. They may make changes like we talked about, but pitching wise, 180 innings free agent, 180 innings free agent, 170 innings free agent. The only two guys set in your rotation, one guy threw 5 1/3 innings all year, and the other guy ended up throwing 110 innings, but he missed the first 3 months of the year. So there's a lot of maybe good things, maybe bad things. We'll see who they sign and what the results are, but the starting pitching could be very, very different. But the rest of this team shouldn't look as crazy, or it has the potential to not look as crazy different?
How do you weigh the risk and reward of a player that could get 10, 12 years, and you say, okay, we could get this many great years, but we could get what the Angels got from Pujols the last few years? That's got to be a tough call when you're thinking of making a potential huge commitment.
Sure. And any multi-year free agent commitment, you have to think through, what is this going to look like in year one? What is this going to look like in year two? What is this going to look like in year three? And so on. And the longer the commitment, the more complicated that analysis becomes, and the more chance for variability in performance it becomes. And that's certainly part of all of these discussions that we're having internally. And it's no different than every other club is going to go through.
You also ask yourself, when you hand out, let's say, an 8-year contract, how many of those years need to be really good for you to say it's worth it? So if Soto gets 15 years, which is certainly on the table, how many of those years need to be all-star Soto Hall of Fame like for you to say, you know what, it was worth the crap at the back end? And that's the question. We all kind of differ on it. I always love, and I know we don't care about it because it's DC, I always love the idea of debating the Patrick Corbin contract. You know, the Nationals gave him a contract. His first year, he has a really good year, and they win the World Series, and he's a key part of it. And then the rest of it, he's the worst pitcher in baseball. Is that a good contract? Like, my answer would be, yeah, I won the World Series. But I guess you could fight back and say, sure, but how about the rest of that contract? So it's different with each player. The expectations are very, very different. But I think in the Soto case, my answer, if you want my answer, would be, if I could get 65% of that contract to hit on what I thought the player was, I think that's a win. It's why I even look at Beltran's contract and I say, you know what? It worked overall, but everybody's different.
Obviously, Juan is one example of a player for whom you might have to bid against any other big market teams, but there are others too. In general, how much do you kind of set it up and say, I'm going here no matter where that goes? Like, how do you just kind of assess that part of free agent analysis?
I think in any negotiation, whether it's a trade negotiation or a free agent negotiation, we try to come up with a negotiation plan. We try to understand how the negotiation may play out, and ultimately where our thresholds are. And I think that's a healthy way to do these things. We don't have absolutes. There's nothing we're going to do that's an absolute. We have to react to the market. We have to react to the needs of our team and how the offseason evolves. But we have an idea of how we're going to value players, and for the most part, we're going to stick to
it. Are you, though? You know, you could value players however you want in your mind around a chalkboard, but then when the negotiations come and you really want that player, you value them high, but you really want that player, and another team takes it up a notch, you're telling me you're not going to throw out your value and say, I'm going to go a little bit further because I want to get that player? I don't know about that.
Last year, it seemed like there was a sense that everybody was waiting on Ohtani. The Ohtani domino had to fall, and then other players could figure out where they were going. Teams who did not get Ohtani knew what sort of money they had left. Is it similar at all this offseason with Soto?
We'll find out. I don't know. I don't know how teams are going to react. I don't know what teams are going to be interested in which players. And so I think every free agent season, every offseason plays out a little bit differently. Pretty early for me to determine or predict how this one will play out.
Do you need the Soto question to be resolved before you go down other 9-figure roads?
Not going to comment on any specific player negotiation, but we're going to stay in contact with a wide variety of players throughout free agency, and that includes right now.
I'll give you the guess. He says he doesn't know. I think most free agency, most of it, not all of it, I think most of it will be at a standstill until Soto signs, because I think that Boras knows that's going to impact the contracts of some of his other players and the teams that are going to need to be really aggressive. Forget us for a second. Look at the Yankees. If they don't keep Juan Soto, Boras knows he has an ownership group that's going to feel itchy, desperate, and have a lot of money to make big moves. So my answer on this, and we'll all find out together, is I do not think the market moves until Juan Soto picks a team, which I think is going to happen probably in early December.
Do you consider yourself in the market for a center fielder?
I think we'll evaluate that. We have confidence in Tyrone Taylor. I think, certainly bringing in someone who potentially has the ability to play center field alongside him is a path we could go down. So that's something that I think we'll continue to look at throughout the offseason.
You don't view it as an obvious hole then?
No, I don't view it as a hole.
No, I don't think it's a hole because Tyrone Taylor could kind of fill that temp hole until Drew Gilbert or Angel Acuna or Jet Williams says, I'm the center fielder. And that's the way I would handle things. I think the only way the Mets add like a real center fielder, I'm not talking about a Bader-like platoon player, is if a big trade comes along. Let's just say, I know he's not coming off a great year, but let's just say in that Garrett Crochet trade idea, Luis Robert becomes available. And now this trade expands. It involves 5 minor league prospects, most of them position players. You could totally see a guy like Robert coming back to the Mets. He's not coming off a great year, but that's the only way I see them adding like a legitimate everyday center fielder. Otherwise, I think they're going to treat center field the way I've laid it out, as we're keeping it open until one of those young players we mentioned grabs it.
The Yankees and Mets could be going for the same players this year. Through the history, you haven't seen that a whole lot. Do you feel that competitiveness where, your fans and their fans are rooting for this guy? Then how do you view that being in the same town as the Yankees? Are they just another team, or do you feel them being in town?
I think from my perspective, I'm most focused on making the right decisions for the Mets, regardless of what any of our other 29 teams are doing, including the team that happens to be across the town. I think we have to make the right decisions for us, put ourselves in the best chance to compete continuously, and that's what I'm going to be focused on.
I think Juan Soto is such a great player that the Met-Yankee thing doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's a let's stick it to the Yankees or we can't let him go to the Mets. I think it's here's this stud in the prime of his career. If we're the Yankees, we can't lose him. And if we're the Mets, we got to have him. So I think the Met-Yankee thing, in my opinion, is more backdrop for us than it is anything, because the guy's such a good player. That's enough of a reason to go get him.
David, you mentioned Jeff McNeil and his flexibility, like you did yesterday, ability to play second base, the output as well. Does what you do maybe this offseason influence where he plays for you or what he does? Because he's also a name that gets thrown out through trade speculation as well.
Yeah, I think with a player with Jeff's versatility, how we construct the roster, he allows us to construct the roster in many different ways. We don't have to put him in ink in any one position. He can move around and help us fill out a roster and play an important part on the roster, depending on who we bring in here.
Look, that's always been a positive that Jeff McNeil had. I look at the outfield, though, with Brandon Nimmo pretty much being locked in left field, according to David Stearns. We did that on the first David Stearns Speaks edition of the Rico Brogna, where he said, look, he's the left fielder. They don't really plan on moving him to center. You think about right field hopefully being Juan Soto. You think of Starling Marte either not being on the team or being the DH. I don't really think there's a spot for McNeil in the outfield. So I get it. In the past, he's always had that versatility edge. I think if he's on the team, I've laid out, I don't think he will be on the team, but if he is on the team, I think it would probably be more as the second baseman than moving out to the outfield.
Last year, you guys went for Yamamoto. You guys have a Kodai right now. How do you view the Japanese, like a free agent, or the Japanese market in general?
So I think more and more we're seeing really quality players, particularly pitchers, coming over from Japan. It's a market we've been involved in the past. I would expect us to continue to be involved with it when it makes sense. And clearly it's becoming more of an annual basis where really talented Japanese pitchers are coming over.
Yeah, one of the things, and it's funny that was the last question that we have with David Stearns. But it's funny that that's the last question, especially when you compare it to the first thing we talked about an hour ago when we started this, Rico, and that's Roki Sasaki and the fact that he has been posted and is available for the Mets to sign and for anyone else to sign. The beauty of the Japanese pitcher in a lot of ways is the age. It's the fact that Yamamoto gets to free agency, and I talked about this endlessly last year, and the appeal was how young he was. The appeal of Sasaki is the same thing. He's so young. Think about the top-line starting pitchers in this market. Max Fried, Blake Snell, Corbin Burns. What do they all have in common? They're in their 30s. And it doesn't mean they don't have 5 good years left in them. They may. But I think being able to bring someone over as a free agent who's in their 20s, where you could argue the best is yet to come, that's the appealing part of the Japanese pitching market. And speaking of starting pitching, coming up this week on the Rico Brogna, we go in depth on the starting pitching free agent market. We will go very deep into that. We'll also read a lot of your emails. There was a lot of debate with what I was saying the other day about Willy Adames versus Pete Alonso. So we'll read a lot of your emails. Many critical of my opinion. That is totally fine. That's the beauty of the Rico. We will debate it. That's coming up this week on the Rico Brogna. Also, this is for next week, and I look forward to it. Not this upcoming week, but the week after. MLB is going to announce their awards, the Rookie of the Year, the MVP, the Cy Young. We are going to have our Mets award show. Pete and I will be handing out our awards for the New York Mets. Who was our MVP? Who was our Cy Young? Who was our Rookie of the Year? Who is our reliever of the year? Who is our biggest disappointment of the season? That's always a fun one. Who doesn't love handing out that award? We also have the moment of the season and the playoff performer of the year and the surprise of the year. So if you have opinions on such subject, opinions on who should win each award, you can always email us, thericob@gmail.com. So we got Ricos coming at you fast and furious throughout this offseason. We hope you enjoyed this elongated Rico, and a very special thank you to the great Pete Hoffman, because Pete Hoffman has recorded not one, but 2 Rico Brognas from freaking Germany, all the while going to beer gardens, drinking his beer, seeing Munich, and doing his thing. And I got a lot of crap, Hoff, on my radio show, Evan and Tiki, Monday through Friday at 2 o'clock. I got a lot of crap for even allowing you to do the Rico from Germany. That, how could you do that? Let him enjoy Germany. And I said, what you don't understand about the Hoff is he loves the Ricoers. So I do want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. You can always say, shut the F up, Evan. We're not doing a Rico. And you've got great commitment, and I appreciate that.
No, dude, this is one of my favorite things to do. Like, I wouldn't – it's not about the money, as people would say. It's good, but I actually love doing this. Dude, the Mets are my number one passion. I don't care about, the fact that I'm in Germany. It's great. I'm enjoying myself. It has not changed that I need to be here whenever you're doing a podcast, man. This is fun. So thank you.
You're the best. We appreciate it, Pete. Thank you very much. RicoB@gmail.com if you want to chat. Download, subscribe, rate, comment, whatever the hell they tell you to do about podcasts. Sure do it. It helps all of us. Thank you very much for listening to another edition, a long edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.